Welcome back, listeners to Learning from Friends. My name is Cade Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that we get to do bi-weekly together, and I am glad that you are back here to enjoy this topic today that we're going to look at of Native American history. And the guest that I have with us today is Zack Thompson, who I had but previously before, just a couple episodes ago, episode number 70 and episode number 71, where we talked about Bigfoot and aliens. Go back and listen to those. It was hilarious. It was awesome. It was good fun. And I will say that I walked away from it with a whole new perspective as well, which is the whole point of this whenever you're learning from your friends and changing things up. So before we do this, as you all know, we got to have a quote. And I'm going to jump back a little bit instead of, doing my nieces and nephews and a couple other people. I'm going to go back and do one for my mom today. So, Mom, take it away.
A quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Write on your heart that every day is the best day in the year. He is rich who owns the day, and no one owns the day who allows it to be invaded with fret and anxiety. Finish each day and be done with it. You have done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. Begin it well and serenely, with too high a spirit to be cumbered with your old nonsense. This new day is too dear, with its hopes and invitations, to waste a moment on the yesterdays.
Wonderful. Perfect. Thank you. It's always good to hear my mom's voice and add that little bit to the podcast. And it's always good to hear your mom's voice. It makes a big difference in your life.
That's true.
So, Zack, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Howdy. Glad to be here. Glad to be back.
And we went on break from school for a little bit. We had a school break, so we feel recharged a little bit from that. And, here we go. I just got back from the Midwest, and, well, not Midwest, but Midwest, across country. I took a Amtrak train ride from New York all the way over to San Francisco, and going through the Rockies and going through some of these areas. My brain was just
that's cool.
Tingling with all kinds of stuff and getting excited to talk about this topic today. Because when I think of the West, my brain immediately goes to the Native Americans. It just kind of does.
Yeah.
And that nature.
Hard not to.
It's hard, definitely. It's hard, definitely not to.
Think cowboys and Indians.
I remember playing that a lot as a kid and going through that little process. And then all the different, we had so much in our culture from our parents of watching the Westerns. And then you had all the Western films that were, they had faded out from the previous generation, but as our parents had watched them and their grandparents had watched them, so it was kind of like a weird little nostalgia thing that was kind
it's even one of the original genres of film, Westerns.
Exactly.
Which can be said a lot. There's even a lot of Australian Westerns.
This is true. The Germans really love Westerns, surprisingly. It's like, okay, cool. Things you never know in life that you're like,
be a lot of different stories told in the West. A lawless time.
Yeah, it was the Wild West.
People's existence.
Going into this topic here, how in the world did you get attracted to this, of the Native American history?
I believe we already touched on it even. When I was a kid, my father's always been into Westerns in the West, and I myself, as we mentioned some the last time we talked, and I've already mentioned here with you some tonight before we began, I like skiing and I like the West, and it's somewhat of an obsession of mine and was of my father's. And I remember being a kid and definitely seeing Gunsmoke and Bonanza on all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But then I remember at just 4 going to Maggie Valley and Cherokee, North Carolina for the first time, and going to a place where the Cherokee here in the South remained for a long time, and seeing the play Unto These Hills about the story of somewhat myth, but somewhat also based in fact, of how the Cherokee remained there where they did in North Carolina, and they were here in North Georgia up until the time of removal also.
True. Good old Appalachian Mountains.
I remember going there and being a little boy, and I actually remember a moment, oddly, in a store where I was playing like cowboys and Indians with some like figurines, and my dad thought it was interesting how I was playing with them, and then we went to that play, and I just remember thinking like maybe my perception as a kid even of what the story was about the Indians, and it's better to use the term Native Americans, that their story maybe wasn't what I thought it was, and just this simple cowboy Indian narrative that you might first be introduced to, as you were talking about. And that really started a lot of my interest, and then watching the Westerns and seeing how that was maybe somewhat Hollywood and maybe some reality, but maybe somewhat definitely made up somewhat
True.
perspective of the Native Americans in early Western film, which did form a lot of the narrative in modern U.S. or even world pop culture, and even to what a lot of people might be the perceived history.
That's the thing. Whenever Europeanization, right there, is really what kind of wrote the perspective to the victors go the spoils.
True.
Kind of that way of history, and that's whenever you dramatize something. That was the kind of the big one of the white man had came in and kind of got to do the majority of the writing whenever it came into the golden age of
even that's somewhat
TV.
true. A lot of Native American or North American Native American peoples did not have, some of them didn't have any real languages at all. Many oral traditions and oral stories and language that was passed down orally. And there's some exceptions to that, certainly, but that's part of the deal right there. And that's true of other peoples throughout both North and South America.
Things get lost, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, and sometimes things were purposely destroyed, perhaps.
That is true as well. You can be able to look at it. It's been on your perspective of definitely for sure. And it's always surprising as we get older, the more we uncover, the more we notice about ourselves, as your perspective starts to kind of change. And especially with our textbooks, the way they look at certain things and portrayed different people. And they're like, as you get older, like, wait a second.
They're even now all alive.
Yeah, exactly. Now, didn't you actually go to a Native American college?
Yes, and that's what I was going to say, that interest that began early on with even just my interest in films and then learning about Native Americans as I grew. Oddly, it was more coincidental, turned into me attending a majority Native American college in when I was 19, I believe, yeah. And I went there to play football, actually. I was playing college football.
Hey.
But it turned out it was a like 70-something% Native American student body at Fort Lewis College, which is in Durango, Colorado. Very, very southwest corner of the state, kind of the heart of the Southwest. The year before that, I had been offered a scholarship actually to play at their rival school, Western State, which is, I think, since changed its name. I think they're now Western College, maybe. But they're in Gunnison, Colorado. And I first went out west in 97. And that was to Gunnison, and then up the road to, again, skiing in Crested Butte.
You love your skiing, man.
And I'll never forget, like, we landed on the tarmac, actually got off, and my mother and I had never, either one, been out west. My mother had never been on a ski trip. I'd never been out west at all. And first time I've flown, and we get off, and it's like negative 30. Oh, it's ever been this cold again ever since I've been out west. Blowing, spitting snow. And we had way too much luggage, and we're like on the tarmac, and I was like, yes! But Gunnison is also a very cold location. It debates like it and Duluth, Minnesota debate over the coldest spot in the lower 48. It's very windy there in Gunnison. So while Crested Butte's a lovely ski mountain up the road, it is not right there at Gunnison. And I did not fall in love with the idea of playing football and living there in Gunnison in town. Although there's even another national park there in the Black Canyon of Gunnison, which I went to before it was a national park, actually.
Oh, nice.
It's odd.
Hey, you never know. At things that we just got a new national park labeled this year.
Yeah. So. I like checking those off. But I ended up going to Fort Lewis, their rival school in Durango, and as it turned out, many of my teammates were Native American. And if you have proof that you're an eighth Native American or more, you go to Fort Lewis tuition free.
Oh, wow.
At least that's the way it used to be. And so there are peoples there, a very diverse multinational group and student body, which was not much larger than Cherokee. Actually, at the time I arrived there, it was just about 1,000 people more than
nice.
CHS was at the time. And it, I think roughly like 4,000-5,000 people now, I think.
So you got to, like, the nice thing is with 1,000 people, you got to know a lot of people. You get more intimate relationships.
And many of those people were from all over the continent and even the globe. Those people from Hawaii, different groups from Alaska there, and all sorts of Native peoples from all over the country. And it was pretty neat to be on that campus. And it's a stunning campus to begin with that I kind of did gravitate to and was kind of captivated by the whole town of Durango and the whole area there. It's, if you guys are out there, fans of Louis L'Amour, talking about Westerns again, the area of Purgatory, which is where the ski mountain is and how it gets its name now. They call it a Durango ski resort when I was there, but people didn't like it, so they went back to the name Purgatory, which is a cool name for a ski mountain.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Not gonna lie. How many years were you out there at the university?
I was just out there for a couple. It just 09 and 2010, and I came back. I quit playing football and transferred to Valdosta State eventually to play ball there, and ended up graduating from.
How'd you get recruited from being in Georgia all the way out to
I did the
Colorado?
recruiting myself.
You did the recruitment. Okay,
I wrote
so you
a
had
lot
a plan.
wrote some letters, sent some emails, and called some people, and I got a few offers from places like Maine and Montana State, and I thought I was going to go Montana State.
Yeah.
And oddly, Fort Lewis played there like a year after I left, which would have been cool to get to play in Bozeman. But I had some connections there. I thought about Northern Arizona. Those were some of the places that I touched base with and actually responded and had interest in me playing ball there as a wide receiver. But Fort Lewis kind of stuck out to me because the coach that responded to me, I'll never forget, I was driving down Riverstone Parkway right in front of the movie theater. Got a call on my phone, and it was Coach Morris out there who happened to be from Georgia and had ended up out there himself. And when I tried to touch base with him, I kind of stuck out to him. So he wanted to reach base and give me an offer to come pay a visit and see if I liked the place. And they liked me, and I loved Fort Lewis and Durango, and it was one of the better experiences I've ever had.
That's the thing. You never know what could happen and how you can get kind of stick out on somebody to either an interview or any process on because of it. You never can tell. That's
cool.
the neat thing about it. That's pretty cool to get to be able to have those kind of experiences there.
It was cool to play college football. I was the first guy on the east side of my family to do so, and I really liked Coach Riff Lotto. He was a cool dude, and it was odd to me that I did not end up out there to go to school for Native American studies, but that was one of their majors, which is not somewhere that there is a lot of places. And so I was there and began my degree towards being a historian. I figured I'd take some Native American classes while I was there.
So what all did you really take?
Oddly, those are some of the coolest classes I found myself in. Like, I didn't expect to be able to have that opportunity, and it was pretty neat. I was the only non-Native American in my Native American studies classes.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Boxer was first year there from Washington State. She was Yakima, a group that's from that area, and I don't think she knew what to think about me the first day I was in both of her classes. The first class, there was one that was like a generic Native American intro class, and there was some people around campus knew I was there. People had started calling me Georgia at that point, and they
it could be a lot worse of a nickname.
Oh, it worked to my advantage. There was a lot of girls like to meet the guy with the Southern accent, so it was not bad. In that class that day, man, they go around, there's like 50 people in there, and everybody's Native American teacher, and they have me stand up and introduce myself. Man, the whole place like a pin drop. Everybody turn around and look, because most of them hadn't heard nobody that sounded like me no way. So I was thinking I was the only dude on the team from east of Mississippi. So odd to me, most of my teammates, mostly guys from Colorado, had never been east of Mississippi. Some of them had been to Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York. I remember a few of them on like field trips or stopping by in the airport, but most of them had never been east. And that was odd to me because I've been going out west all over the different states since I was a little boy. So it was peculiar to me that so many of them had never been out there. And most of them a lot of them had never met in person a Southerner or somebody with an Appalachian accent, which I don't think is too bad when I'm living around here. But when I was in Colorado, it seemed to be more prominent. And like I said, it got stuck out sometimes.
It does happen, and it's interesting thinking about regionally how that could really happen of where people don't get to leave the area, whether it's financially or just not having the resources, whether it's not financial, whether it's just like, okay, we just don't leave. Our family's always been here, we stay here. Or
it's especially true of Southerners.
Exactly. And you look at it, and some people have never seen a colored person for a long time in their life, or they never seen someone from Appalachia, or they never seen someone from Asia, or they, like, wait, what? Yeah, how do you not see this? Because of, we get lucky and we had to travel and see these things and get around.
I had a professor that was there at Fort Lewis, and it was actually cool. We got two professors there that I've seen on the History Channel on TV, and they were not my Native American studies teachers, but this guy his name is Dwayne Smith, and he actually wrote the book of the Colorado history class I took, which was kind of cool. I never had that many times either, where the professor was like, yeah, go get the book, I wrote it.
Yeah, I'm like that. I get some of the money back. So,
but yeah, he was interesting. He was from I want to say he was from Illinois, and like middle of nowhere, Illinois. But like he was like 80 something when he was my professor in like 2009, 10. And so he told a story though about when he got out there. He went to CU. That's how he ended up out there, and he ended up in Durango years later. But he went to CU, and he had never seen someone who was black in his life in person before he left a little small town in southern, I don't know if it's southern Illinois or not, but somewhere in middle Illinois where he was. And that was odd to me because I'm like, I just, him being the age he was, and it was interesting. I actually had a very interesting encounter in one of his classes where there was a man that had been a Nazi youth and wrote a book that we had for the class. I can't remember the name, but the book was this guy's own narrative, his own story of being sent to like the Czech Republic area, Czechoslovakia, as a Nazi youth in a camp as the war broke out, and then having to fend for himself and hike from the Czech across Germany, war-torn in the middle of World War II, to Dusseldorf, if I'm not mistaken, where he was from, to find actually, lo and behold, his mother and I think sisters were still alive.
Yeah.
Like eating off of a dead horse carcass, I believe was the story. And they were able to get on a boat and get to America. And he
was on your actual campus still in Durango.
He happened to live in Durango.
Oh, wow.
And so the professor, who was not as old as this gentleman, I believe, and the guy wrote the book and we read it for the class. And then at the end of the class, Dwayne Smith, and I had him for several classes, he had this, and I don't remember the man's name, but this guy that had grown up indoctrinated into the Nazi youth, and he came to the class to speak with us with his wife, and he was 90 something. And it was one of the more powerful things. It was just our class. It was pretty wild to hear him talk about the actual experience of living through what I was summing up.
That's crazy. There's so many interesting people out there in the world, and you never know where you're going to meet them at, what the opportunity is to kind of lead it to. As I mentioned earlier, with you getting the opportunity to go out and play football because of the coach was from Georgia. So, I'm going to give this guy kind of a look. And talking to your teachers, hey, look, we are some people, we're teachers. We have stories, we know people, we can kind of connect to stuff, and we can, we like to be able to share that kind of stuff. Now, do you have like any specific area of like topic that you were really passionate about when looking at Native American history?
Maybe just Native American studies in general. It was cool when I ended up leaving Fort Lewis. I had those experiences in my classes, which were pretty cool. I probably gravitate towards the Southwest being the area of my expertise, or maybe the Cherokee themselves.
Okay.
Because I was in the Southwest and I had a class that was Southwest Native Americans, and everyone in there, other than Dr. Boxer and myself, was a Southwest Native American.
Oh, nice.
So it was pretty cool to learn from like the 10 people in there covering the different groups of a Navajo was in the room with us, and someone who was Hopi and someone who was Hickory in different sects of Apache, and this Southern Ute group, which is right there. Yeah, they get some cool names. Hickory and Chiricahua. Those are cool names, both Apaches. Several different sects of the Apache, but those two were cool names to me.
It sticks out. You remember it.
Yeah. But ended up coming to Valdosta, and they were just starting a Native American minors program, which I was one of the first people to get out of, and that was pretty cool. So I ended up having a lot of classes with some gentlemen who were not Native American, but had lots of expertise about Southern groups in the Southeast. That was pretty cool.
That is pretty neat for it. Now, do you have any like family ancestry that's maybe connected back in some way?
I do. It's not concrete. On my mother's side, my grandfather, his grandmother was supposedly Cherokee.
Oh, wow.
And they tried to hide on the books her ancestry.
Yeah, assimilate in that way, yeah.
Now, they would joke about this, and we did in one of my classes about, everybody's got a Cherokee princess grandmother.
And everything.
That is a known thing. But in my family, I think it might actually have been true. So I think that makes me like a 16th or not even, or
I can't remember
like that.
Whenever it gets like generation, it kind of like changes the number, like multiplies or something like that. Yeah, it takes a lot of math.
Well, and there's nothing really known on my father's side, but it is also said there could be some Cherokee or Native American. Oddly, where we are here in Cherokee County was traditionally more Creek territory.
Yep, way more Creek. Yep.
So we find Arrowhead out here in this part. It very likely was probably Creek.
Very much so.
Eventually, the Cherokee kind of encroach, and then after that, later on, Europeans and Americans encroach on all their territory here in North Georgia.
It all changed. Yeah, I have on my dad's side of the family, I can't remember specifically the name of the different tribes that they were kind of a part of, but I actually had family members that were on the Trail of Tears. Like, you would look at my skin and be like, there is no way you have any Native American in you.
But see, that's like, true of Cherokee. Sometimes they're much more pale skinned.
Well, if you look at my sister and my father, they've actually got the black hair and the tanner skin, kind of like a little bit tanner look to it. My sister doesn't, but my dad has that kind of like look, a little bit more of the kind of look, but wouldn't per se going, hey, like, he looks, Native American, but he has the tone that's a little bit there. And I can't remember, there was like 2 or 3 different tribes that we were kind of like connected to further back on my dad's side of the family. On my mom's side, we were all just like Scotch Irish, like kind of deal. But
Oh, that's a lot of music.
it's interesting. But yeah, we were the Kells, and we actually have my great aunt has where we signed in out in Colorado, and then came back in where they've got a little bit of reparations. Like, surprisingly, one of the groups that got some reparations to be able to buy some land that they used, which is kind of neat to be able to like, wow, cool. Like, I have that. Interesting. Sorry, Sunel, if you hear this, if I butcher names or don't remember the names. You've told me like 100 times, and I apologize. My memory is not that great, and I should have reached out to ask for the names again and some of that. But my apologies. A lot's always going on. But with all that kind of going on, the misconceptions, we have so many things that we talked about earlier in our history books and what we saw on TV and stuff like that. What are some like misconceptions that you want to address before we go further into this?
One would be the banishing Native American. I mean, it's true that a lot of Native Americans that were existing at the time of Columbian contact and afterwards, a vast majority of both continents gets wiped out just merely by disease.
Yeah.
Different times, but in vast numbers more than anything because of disease. And then eventually, I mean, even the American government themselves or BIA agents giving people blankets that had smallpox and taking advantage. And
unfortunately,
that's later on, but there, that one, sometimes I think of some of my classmates of old and how they would joke, and it might bring up the Disney Pocahontas movie,
Oh, yeah.
very sexualized in that movie, or how she is. And the story not completely accurate to what more or less is actually known about John Smith and her both, and who she ended up marrying. I've never even watched the second one that much, but it does have a good song in it.
Yeah, there's good music, but Disney will always dramatize and make it, it's got to make it kid friendly, right?
Yeah.
And also for adults to be able to see some interest in it
Well,
as well.
that was having studied some Western film and Native American film history, Native American women especially and throughout film could be over sexualized.
I can believe that heavily whenever we look at that, and a lot of the language that we use in the movies wind up getting overly used. That's not actually like true, or not actually like kind of like correct. And you're like, really? Like, but that was what people had always assumed.
Back to what I was originally saying, that they're not, the banishing it's a total myth, man. There's like 300,000 Navajo out there. This is a giant group. They're not all of them in Northeast Arizona. There's a lot throughout a lot of cities. There's I think a large Navajo population in LA, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, cool.
So it's a large group. I mean, the whole, kind of the whole northwest corner of Arizona pretty much is Grand Canyon. The whole northeast corner, most of it is the Navajo, except for what is the Hopi encompassed inside the Navajo. They're on the mesa tops, which is a very interesting group, which, as we discussed before, has some maybe alien ties to some of their stories and origin myths and the Kachinas. But there's many groups still out there, and they're all over the place, from Seminole and Cherokee and Creek here in the South to groups out west that are everywhere. As I said, representative at Fort Lewis, at least probably multiple people from about every group throughout the whole continent. So it was a pretty cool place to be and spend a few years. It was a very learned experience.
Smart. Now, there are many terms that over the years, I know in our textbooks that I've seen of like, oh yeah, we've used the term Native Americans, we used First Nation, we used Indians, and there's been so many different ones that have been used over the years. What would you say is politically correct, and what would be politically kind of incorrect or incorrect to use?
Native American is just like African American would be. Native American is not going to offend most people. And if you know who someone is, or they might prefer it, you refer to somebody as the group they're actually from, whether they're Cherokee or Creek or Navajo or whatever nation they might associate with. I would say one of those two. Indian is not totally offensive, but it is not as nice or politically correct a term as Native American if you just want to be, because it does carry a connotation with it, a context. And then you can even get to, I've had students and people that is Injun, that's definitely offensive.
Yeah, definitely offensive. Yeah, when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's like the Washington Redskins, man. Come on.
Yep.
I love football, but that just had to go to the wayside. Even the Cleveland Indians with the name Indians was one thing, but then they went a step further with having a red-faced dude as the mascot.
Yeah.
So, I don't think as many, and I had this debate in classes and heard it amongst Native peoples themselves that, what about Braves or Seminoles like Florida State,
True.
Atlanta? Those aren't near as offensive, or the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs, although every group did not have a chief. That's a misconception. Every group was not having
there you go. That's a big misconception.
Headdresses, which you should not wear at a music fest because it's kind of cultural misappropriation.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
I get having a good time, but you don't have to go there. But yeah, the Kansas City Chiefs, it's not like a ugly term, it's
true.
It's somewhat an homage, and so are Braves, and Seminole is the actual group themselves. And there's a lot of actual Seminoles in Florida State, I think, are definitely voice that they're okay with. I think there's some that still don't like it.
Oh yeah,
some that would.
There's always gonna be some that do and don't. It's
no
weird in between.
Mascots of anybody being a Native American.
Yeah,
as a Native American being a mascot, and I can understand that. A lot of colleges were early to do that. A myriad of them. Miami, Ohio, I think Stanford. There's a bunch that had different Native American connotations with their mascots, even if it wasn't totally their name. That were very early on to change and become something else. Like I believe Miami, Ohio is the Red Men. I believe they're the Red Hawks now. Have been, I think, most of my life, if not all of it. So I don't see why franchises in America couldn't do the same.
True. I agree with that.
Slow on the uptake there.
Yeah, but we're getting there. As with all things, it's, sometimes things take a little bit longer to kind of go through the processes, but we kind of get there.
I will say Guardians, I think, is a terrible name.
Oh gosh, I'm not gonna lie. The Commanders, my brain goes to it's the commies. I'm like, that's my, and sorry guys if I offend anybody for saying that. Whenever you're like, oh my, but I'm a fan. I'm like, but the Guardians at least has a connection because they have the statues in the town that are considered the Guardians of the actual
I would have been Cleveland.
That are the of Cleveland. There's the statues that kind of connect. There is a connection there.
I wish they would have been the Cleveland Rocks. I don't know.
They actually have the Cleveland Rockers for the WNBA.
Oh,
but they don't exist anymore. But yeah, the Cleveland Rockers for a little while. That's going a little sideways as we do, but cool. You never know.
I like sports too.
I'm a big sports fan as well. So I can't help it. So looking here, let's go into some of the history portion. Let's dive backwards a little bit here. How did the first people they believe got here?
Well, how do Native Americans believe, or how is history written?
Each and all.
How do I believe? Those are all different answers, perhaps.
That's the cool thing about it. There are so many answers to it. There's not just one.
As we may have touched on in our alien Bigfoot discussion, there's a lot that I think personally is not known out there yet about the narrative of human history. I even read a report just this past week on break about a recent discovery, and I'll be honest, I only read the headline. I did not actually read the article about a footprint that was a human footprint, a actual bipedal hominid creature that was fossilized footprint in stone. It was about 5 million years old, they thought. And that was in the Iberian Peninsula. That was in Spain, not in Africa. So it was just interesting because it might I think a lot of historians, anthropologists, archaeologists need to be more open to the idea that the story of our human history is going to evolve as we have more time to unearth some of these things.
True.
And maybe it's not all as concrete as we would like to imagine it is. And I think Native Americans' arrival in North America is part of that. Many Native peoples believe they have been there forever, they'll tell you.
Yeah.
Or at least perhaps from the peoples I've talked to, that they were there for generations, and I'm talking tens of thousands of years prior to when we think they arrived just across the Bering Strait. I think there was probably many arrivals back and forth.
That's it, because you have people coming technically from the south. They could be coming from the east. They come in from the west. They could have already been here. That's the whole thing. If there's not just one answer, and I think to do that, we want to put an answer on things. We want to put like a label on things, but it's not always as easy as we think.
There's a place in Ecuador and has a unique type of pottery, if I'm not mistaken. And that pottery is only found elsewhere, like in an archaeological record, in a small location in Japan. And there's a similarity, again, if I'm not mistaken here, between those two locations and a place in Southern California with a group called the Chumash. And I don't believe it was pottery. I believe it was something else that was similar that these two groups had. And it's, me and my father discussed this before about, the Polynesians made all over the Pacific, and there was some really extensive naval explorers throughout history, including from China and other groups. And it's hard for me to fathom that they would find places all the way out to Easter Island in Hawaii and not have made it to the two giant continents
Made it further
a bit
over.
further.
True.
And perhaps they weren't the only groups. The Chinese, the Japanese,
Yep.
maybe other groups from places we can't even imagine that had explored these continents. There are some maps even that go back
Thousands
much
of years.
further than we're supposed to
Oh,
have
yeah.
had maps that can accurately depict Antarctica even, long before anyone is supposed to have explored or even seen its coast. So perhaps we should be quicker to, kind of like we discussed with Bigfoot, and that there is some hard evidence out there when you talk about footprints and tracks and video evidence. Maybe the oral traditions that are sometimes considered outright to be myth and can be dismissed should be taken more considerably by actual science and different disciplines of scholarly work.
I agree that you totally should. We should all kind of put that in there as possibility, realms of possibility here.
Well, to answer the question,
Yeah.
I don't know, 10,000 years ago maybe, might be 10,000 years further back. Some native peoples would certainly contend that. I would think that would be likely in my mind, that maybe there was different groups that came 10,000 years ago when sea levels were lower, ice age was afoot, and maybe they could hop along the coast and get here, and maybe even walk across places like the Bering Strait. But I think it's probably times that were similar to that maybe came earlier, where at least some peoples had gotten here much earlier, and that maybe the different native groups that believe people had been here for a long time are closer to right than we give them credit for in history. Put that history in quotation.
Yeah, the keyword history in quotation there. Because I remember always being in our history books of the, Bering Strait. That's it. It's like, well, wait, what? Wait,
It's a little too simple an
it?
answer.
Yeah, it's too easy. But as we learn within history books, as we get older, you start to learn more and more, and you're more exposed to more information. It's just like they want to make it as simple and easy as they can whenever starting out, in order to, if they get it in your head early, you'll be able to continue just to kind of trust it and kind of grow on. So I'm not saying don't always believe what your textbooks say, but
Well, most people don't like history anyways.
yeah, find time to question and grow and learn. And there's a lot to be learned. Be curious. That's why I always use the end phrase of don't forget to let your curiosity fly high. Stay curious, man. I always find something out there. Now, do we have a idea of like an earliest recording of indigenous people in America that we can look at scientific evidence? Here is a footprint from 10,000 BC or something,
Well, I probably should know the answer to that. I do not. There was people here before Clovis people, I know. Clovis people are very interesting in just the way they, and there's some maybe even debate about quote unquote Clovis people in general, but probably about 10,000 BC before there's any, or BCE, if you like. Somewhere in there before there's much evidence, I think, of hunter-gatherers being on the continent of North America.
Yeah, I'm one of those ones that use BCE. I know it's kind of like conflicting for some people, but I'm like,
I get it. I teach it to students. I try not to confuse them because just getting the timeline in their mind of what AD and BC or BCE and CE are.
There's so many terms that's kind of used there to it as well. That it's just like, for me, I like to stay neutral, especially when it comes to religion in schools and all that. That kind of comes up. That's the biggest challenge.
Well, and that can be part of the confusion even. It's like, wait, why is it being dated by that context?
Yeah.
It's a good question.
It's a great question that today we are not going to be answering that question in this thing. If you would like to do some research, as I tell my kids, feel free, talk to your parents, talk to your family, talk to your people around you. Look in a book. It's out there. Sorry, trying to dodge the question there. Ooh, got myself in a little bit of hot water. But that's so recording history in general. We know there are so many different languages, as we kind of mentioned earlier, and there's so many different ways that history can kind of be passed down. How has history been fully recorded over the years that we've been able to kind of come in contact with?
Oh, I think we touched on a little bit already. Oral traditions, man. I mean, as we're sitting here talking, we're telling stories, and you can learn a lot from. And I've experienced this in my own life from aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles and grandparents, and you learn a lot by word of mouth. And it is whenever we did develop as a society writings and we're able to read and write information to one another. Before that, it was definitely oral traditions.
Yep,
Maybe
on the
music.
campfire. Talk.
And those stories persist, I think, quite enduringly with peoples. And I think of a girl that was in one of my classes who was Navajo, and she was like the same age as you and me. And she grew up on the Navajo res, and which is a sprawling area, a bunch of different towns. If you ever get a chance, if you like Westerns, go to Kayenta. You can go see Monument Valley. It's pretty cool.
Ooh.
But I believe she was from there. And when we were talking about the different Native groups people shared that were in that class, and we were talking about Southwest Native Americans, and when we got to Navajo, she was the only Navajo in the room, and we asked her to share some of their like origin stories that we were talking about, because the Navajo, like some groups, Hopi and others, can be a little bit secretive and secluded with some of their oral traditions and myths, if you're not one of them. And I respect that. And she was like, man, I wouldn't mind sharing with you guys, but there are certain stories that I can only say at a certain time of year with certain people for certain reasons. And that's cool. That's how the story goes. And she's like, there's multiple of those. So I'll tell you that, but I can't share any of the details of those stories because that just
it breaks the code.
Doesn't jive with the beliefs and the story itself. It is honorably told at a certain time of year with a certain group of people. Like Christmas or Easter or something like that. It carried a similar significance, and we did not push her, but I thought that was cool that they even have that. And that is part of why some of the history by us is missed, because we're not privy to that information.
Yeah.
And that should be respected, not totally just, counted out of hand.
Is there any historical like stories or legends that kind of stick out to you that you've enjoyed over the years? Because there's so many,
a bunch of different ones that I learned about, and I meant to grab my notebook that has a lot of those specific type notes in it. I remember things like, I believe it was the Navajo again, would build their certain type of houses, their traditional homes, in a way where the door faced a certain direction, and they had a belief why the door had to face that direction for certain reasons. And there was certain things that even how their homes were built. I really like some of the Northwestern groups. Their artwork is very unique, distinctive.
Oh yeah.
Some of their traditions about the sky bird, that eventually becomes like the Seahawk inspiration. It's that's pretty cool. The Quacuddle band up there, I believe I'm saying that right. Quacuddle. It's from Vancouver Island in the Northwest Territory. They had a very cool society where they would have like a big party. Like they would work all year kind of to do these big parties at certain events, and they'd work all the stuff up to just like, they're keeping, daily routines going, but they're also building stuff up. So whenever it's a wedding or birthday or, whatever, they're having a big shindig and everybody's throwing down. And it was like, everybody's getting a gift. And like, I kind of admire that type of living.
I agree.
But then I think of some oral traditions, like I believe the Iroquois have a different type of tradition where Earth started with like this woman who came down, and again, it sounds a little bit like an alien encounter, came down to Earth, I believe, on a back of a turtle shell, and then eventually ends up starting like seeding the Earth and starting the Iroquois nation. And there's a couple of different stories like that I should have grabbed my notebook to be able to go into greater detail on that are different types of oral traditions with how they believe they came into existence.
Origin stories are so fascinating.
Pretty cool to just think about.
Yeah. And how we get there and how traditions kind of the passed down the oral tradition of that from the grandfather to the grandson, from the grandson, on to the continual generations is always extremely fascinating with how that becomes ultimately this tradition, as you said, on certain days that the in certain times of the year and certain people they can be able to talk to. Traditions are so impactful and important to the people. And you can look at any ethnicity or any groups of people, whether it's religion or not,
be more attributable
traditions.
to Native peoples all over the globe, not just North America,
just all over the world for it. Like
that is more where my history and expertise has come, was Native Americans in North America. But many of these things can be true all over the globe with Aboriginal peoples or peoples in Africa or wherever. I was sitting here looking at the little owl right there you got over there.
Oh yeah, I love the little owl.
It made me think that certain animals like owls and coyotes, depending on the different group, carry certain
Different
significance in their societies. Coyotes often have a lot to do with different origin stories for different groups, which is cool because I don't always think of a coyote as that important of a creature. But
each animal has their own role.
Right.
And that's the cool thing that I respected with the Native Americans ever so long, of looking through history and everything, of they do not waste.
No.
There's not a waste. Everything has a significance and a meaning and a purpose for it. If you're not hunting for sport.
You made me think of
need.
something cool, like, and that can go beyond just living things. I read one of the coolest books I've read, which was an Apache book. It was called Wisdom Sits in Places. It made me think of Jedi and Star Wars. But
yeah,
the idea
I could see that.
It was about place names, and that everything, including rocks, dirt, certain places had names, and that like somebody had named this place that name, that significant Apache name. And it had onus and significance because it was given, and it was worth being remembered and needed to be. And it was even like, it wasn't just like a name given just willy-nilly. It was warranted and earned and felt and signified that place had that name, that it was almost like it was a living entity, and that it breathed and morphed with their culture and society through generations. And that was one of the more eye-opening perspectives I've got out of gleaned from any book I've read.
So I love reading through like Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Taoism, and like you can make some like cross comparisons between of how traditions and nature and the importance kind of connection in here and the creation stories and all of this. And my brain goes, you know what? There's a lot of ideas that I feel are kind of like similarity kind of connections to each other, but different worlds. Is it a different world? Like I like, there's one of those religious beliefs that someone had mentioned to me a while back that I really like. I like that phrase. Is someone used like, everybody's got a little bit of something right. Everybody's got a little bit of something wrong.
It was and
I was like,
life. I don't know if it's in the book, in the movie, where he's talking about how he first came to be introduced to God. That there's different ways of that.
So we mentioned nature, and why is nature so significant?
Well, they're immersed in it. It wasn't like they didn't have homes and villages. They did, but everything, like you just said, nothing was wasteful, and everything carried significance, and they were all very aware of that. Even societally wise, that was true. It was cool. Like I think I would have liked, had I been born in an Apache or Comanche or something. I think I would have dug the lifestyle in a lot of different aspects of living, especially if it was like 1800s when they got horses. Totally changed the lifestyle.
Oh my gosh, yeah. When you had the introduction of all the European stuff that would be brought in there, would change.
Yes, it kind of happened. I had always wondered this, and I learned this when I was in my classes. It was more or less a seminal event that transpired to change the way a lot of Native groups interacted with nature and had their lives because of the introduction of the horse to North American Native societies. And the Spanish get kicked out in a revolt in the late 1600s from the Pueblo revolt. That was the Spanish influence that was in what today is Taos, and that was probably, I believe, where it was sparked from. But there was several different towns where they planned to kick out the Spanish.
Yeah.
All at once, planned a coordinated attack in different locales to kick the Spanish back into Mexico, and it worked. And the Spanish flee for, I think, a decade or two, and during that time, horses got dispersed, and horses became ingrained in certainly different communities' lives, like the Comanche and especially Plains Indians, that it really transformed their way of life and led to some of the cooler cultures. I didn't mention the Sioux earlier when I was talking about different groups. The Sioux have always been captivating to me, the different groups of the Sioux. And I love the movie Dances with Wolves. My old Native American classmates would joke about that one because it is a great movie and does pay respects to Native American way of life and the Sioux in particular. But, they had to pick for Hollywood. Kevin Costner had to pick a white guy, go a native, and the really kicker is that he happens into the one white chick in the village that happens to be there, which could have happened, but very unlikely. Could have just gave a Native American girl the role, and it would have been just as good a story. But
Hollywood, man.
Yeah,
Hollywood.
Yeah, you got to conceive of who Hollywood is who their audience is, and who they're selling to. And although some of my favorite Native American films were ones I learned of there. I just forgot the name of it. Smoke Signals is one of them. It's like a late 90s movie that is one of the first films, I believe one of the first, if not the first, that it has like a Native American director and all Native American cast. And it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool film.
I'll have to check that out.
I believe there's one other one. I can't think of what it is. That's like late 90s, early 2000s that Hollywood-wise and film-wise, Native Americans took back a little bit of the narrative in those films and meant to do so and did a very good job of it. And they're interesting, cool films worth watching.
Yeah, going back and looking at how things started to change in the 80s to 90s perspective with groups actually wanting to come out and actually speak out more. And that was one thing that the Native Americans again started to have that kind of rebirth.
I mean, that had been true before. Like, you ever heard of Nazareth's album Razmanaz, and they got the song Alcatraz.
Yes.
It's got the Native American beat. Well, I remember thinking that was an interesting tune when I heard it when my dad first bought that CD in like mid 90s. And then he was like, oh, it was actually like an event. It was like Native Americans took over Alcatraz in like, 60 something, 70 something, civil rights. Native Americans had their part of civil rights too. And Alcatraz takeover was part of that. It ends up kind of being a little bit of a tragic story. And there was some other sad parts to Native Americans, just like African Americans, other groups, getting civil rights in the 60s and 70s. Like there's a second Wounded Knee happens like 100 years after the original event. And Wounded Knee, talking about textbooks, and I failed to mention this earlier, Wounded Knee for a long time was a battle. The Battle of Wounded Knee.
Yeah.
No, it was really like BIA agents were starving the group of, I believe, mostly Sioux out that they were under their care. And they were like, forget it. It's winter. We're starving. We're cold. We're hoofing it and looking for food. And they tracked them down, surrounded them on a ridge, and mowed them down with cannon fire, machine guns, pretty much unarmed Native American women, children, and old people. But then you got also even Wounded Knee. Sorry, not Wounded, Sand Creek, aside from Wounded Knee, which also was labeled a battle, but was really both massacres. Sand Creek, even.
Unfortunately, of how terrible.
Just as sad. Sand Creek, I wrote a paper about in college, and it was actually at Valdosta, and the professor, the topic of the class was violence in the 1800s. So I picked a Native American one, which no one else had done, and I thought that would be up my alley. And I was already aware of Sand Creek, and she really liked how she contended, the professor, that it was the most violent century we've had, the 1800s. And, it's the Old West. I get it. Civil War in the midst of it. And you don't have that many major wars. You have a few, the Civil War, Crimean War, but the Old West, it's a lawless time. And I wrote my rough draft, and she didn't like it. And she was like, where's the violence? And I'm like, dude, the most difficult, gut-wrenching parts of that, like, I couldn't even write it. It was so awful because it was really awful stuff. I mean, they were, like, cutting babies out of women alive and then smashing their heads in. And there was graphic detail. She's like, "That's what I want."
Wow.
And I was like, "Man, some of that stuff is,
Okay.
like, hard to read, dude. You want me to write it?" Like, okay. But I mean, there was a lot of things about the violence in the 1800s, and I thought I knew the West quite well that I did not know before I had her introduce some of that to me.
Some of those best teachers are the ones that push your limits to be able to see. We want you to get in the dirt. History's dirty.
Yeah.
History's nasty.
She was very,
It can be very beautiful.
Not Dr. Boxer, Dr. Block. That was her name.
Nice. Glad you had a teacher like that to push you. Let's go a long way.
Yeah, that was my senior seminar. It was a cool class. I'd passed that class to graduate, and half that class dropped out by the time we got to the final shebang.
Wow.
I'll never forget the girl, though. She was pissed, man, because I got there early. I was the first one in line to get in the class, and she was pissed because she came in like a couple minutes behind me.
Yeah.
I could tell, and I sat down in the first seat because I was like, this teacher was hard. I'm going to pass her class.
I'm going to be here. I'm going to be
And
ready.
I was right in the first seat. I could tell this girl was like biting her lip because she wanted to be in that seat. And I offered it to her, and the teacher even was like, gave you the chance.
He gave you a shot.
But she came in with her paper because you had to do like the senior seminar was like, I worked on that paper that whole semester.
Yeah.
She came in, hers done that day. And I was like, what the heck, woman? Like,
yeah.
Like she had already talked to Dr. Block and got it back in the summer and had worked on it since the summer. I was like, all right, whatever. You do you. I'm going to enjoy college while I can still be here.
Yeah. It's like, wow, take to the next level here. Now, as we kind of talked about with nature, we talked about the significance and stuff here of, storytelling and passing down. Community is a huge thing. And there's like the social hierarchy, languages are so drastically important. Like, is there like a commonality in language between tribes as they kind of cross the country, or how does that kind of evolve?
I have a cool map in my room that actually has it. It's a myriad of different language groups that exist throughout the country. And I was going to talk about this earlier. Have you ever heard that some historians, it's debated, think the Cherokee were originally an Iroquois group, and that the Cherokee came from New York about like 500 years before Columbia contact, that they migrated themselves down the Appalachians, more or less, the Appalachian Trail, the warrior way back then, to migrate for whatever reason away from those groups in New York, the traditional Iroquois Confederation, and left to come down here to the South. And there was a group actually that I believe is from North Carolina that migrated similarly up north to, I think, upstate New York also. And some people think that the Cherokee might have been an Iroquois group, or were at least from that area initially before they moved down here, maybe like 500 years before contact with Europeans is happening on the continent. Which is interesting to me because the Iroquois are a cool group. I mean, more so than maybe any other group, other than a few Enlightenment philosophers influenced our founding fathers in the creation of our own Constitution.
It's true. They're very much present.
It was loosely based on their own confederation, which was, the Iroquois could be a very warring people, if I'm not mistaken, historically, but had a lot of cool aspects to their society and communities and how they would get together, being multiple different groups from the Mohawk, several different ones. Let's see. I'd have to look it up. I don't want to butcher them.
I don't blame you. That's always the hard part of being put on the spot.
I would have once been capable of ratcheting that out of my brain really quickly, all the groups, but I don't want to.
We're getting older. We're falling apart.
Yeah, so I've had to do it recently in class and looked it up, but I don't want to mispronounce the names. But the Mohawk tradition, where the hairstyle that comes from, were one of the groups, the most northern of the group, and played an instrumental role in the French and Indian War, and also in Revolutionary War with both American and British ties.
And having a language barrier or a language commonality as they carried across, I mean, that's how the Iroquois can able to expand and continue to grow, is if you have a language or have something to be able to kind of build off of with your people.
That was part of the connection. What made me think it was the Cherokee, I think, had some similar language aspects to the Iroquois, was part of why they were believed to have been one of those groups. I've also heard when I've watched some ancient alien shows. Some Cherokee would think they might have been one of the lost Israelite groups that migrated long ago from the lost tribe of Israel.
Interesting. I have not
I
ever.
also heard about the Phoenicians ending up here maybe long ago too. Of course, there's also stories about like blonde hair, blue-eyed, red-headed Native Americans in the
That's
Northeast
true. Yes.
that were probably had
could have been from
some of
the
that was
Vikings,
probably natural, but
you
also
know?
probably that, yes.
Yeah.
Or whoever, maybe it was Portuguese.
Made their way up.
Fishermen had been here a lot sooner than they wanted to let on to anyone about their fishing hole.
It's true. I don't want to give up good hunting grounds or fishing grounds, things like that.
It's a long way to go just to fish and not have a place to park your boat for a minute.
It's true. Be able to take something back here. Now, hierarchy is a very big thing in societies, just in general. Because you have your upper class, your lower class, your hunters, your gatherers, your
Patriarchal.
Patriarchal.
I love teaching that.
That's the word here.
Matriarchal, patriarchal. Yes. So, what's the difference there? There are a lot of male-dominated societies. There's some female-dominated societies. Native Americans have both. It's cool to learn that there was some even groups that might have actually somewhat disappeared after the time of first contact. Some of the Spanish explorers in the South spoke of some groups that were headed by women. And yet later on, we don't see those groups exactly maybe know what happened to them. Maybe it was disease, maybe it was war, maybe they moved. There are certain groups that were certainly matriarchal societies, more than you would think throughout North America. And it's cool to just know that they were both out there. Many different societies played, women in the Air Corps Society played major role. If I'm not mistaken, were often the ones who decided whether or not to go to war.
How we make these decisions, it's not always have to be a male-dominated thing. And that's something that when we look at a lot of history is that we like to put it in that box, but it's not always that way.
And oftentimes it wasn't so much the dominant, but where they traced their ancestry, like maybe mom and dad are on equal ground, but yet you only trace your ancestry or your name only through your mother's side. Or perhaps it was just through your father's side. Although I believe matriarchal was actually more common to trace your ancestry as a whatever group you were in different Native American societies, that you traced it through your mother's side of the family. Maybe had your like grandfather's name or ties rather than your dad. And oftentimes that would even extend into like maybe mom had a brother and so uncle raised you more than your own daddy. Because not that he didn't play a role, it was just that maybe he taught you a little bit more things than like we would usually imagine an uncle would do in societies today that we're accustomed to. Play different roles.
Yeah. Family structures are drastically can be different from community to community as well. Because that uncle may have never been able to have kids, or that uncle may have been a former warrior who got wounded and had to stay behind as the other one was more together, or he could have been he was more of the wise man in the community or shaman. You never know. They all had their own different roles. I think it happened.
One thing I thought was interesting, different groups had what was termed burdashes. You ever heard that term?
I have not.
Burdash?
I have not.
It was more or less a Native American person who was maybe identified with the opposite sex that they were.
Okay.
And those people were not shunned in Native American societies. They played a central role. Oftentimes, what would happen would be there would probably be a couple burdashes or several. They might live together, and they would house and take care of and raise children who had been orphaned. And maybe, like you said, somebody's parents got killed, died unexpectedly, couldn't take care of them. They wouldn't be cast out of society. They would make sure they took care of them. In Sioux society, there was a belief that kind of like Gandhi thought an eye for an eye was you're going to
make the world blind,
leave the whole world blind. Yeah. So I remember this story I read about a man who, this was actually in a novel, but a very good novel called Waterlily, about a girl who grows up in Sioux society in the late 1800s. And this was written by a lady whose grandmother had actually lived this. And in this story, which is very historically accurate. There is an incident where a man murders another man, and he has two options. The guy that murdered the dude, he can either be left to his own devices and be shunned from society and probably be killed by the next group, or lucky if he's not killed by exposure or elements or creatures.
Who knows?
Or he can accept the responsibility of taking care of the guy he's killed's entire family. Take on his wife, take on his kids, raise him well, take care of his parents, and they'll allow him to stay. And that's what the guy does. And I thought, man, that is pretty neat. Like,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, like that like I can't imagine that being the repercussions in today's society, but instead the guy served a life sentence of doing the right thing instead of serving a life sentence or being killed.
And continuing the hate and pain that could come from
that's that. Me being 18, 70-something was very forward progressive thinking.
That is extremely progressive.
Normally would be the kind of consideration extension given to Native groups maybe in their societies.
And that is a perfect point and where to stop our conversation for right now. When we come back, we'll pick back up talking about that governments when dealing with kind of the land boundaries. Then we're going to go into talking about some of the different individuals of important people to the culture, some locations around the United States, what happened when we had the introduction of, I'm going to say, the white man and some more of the Spanish cultures into the United States. And then kind of start wrapping up with ways that we can be able to help preserve the Native American history that is still remaining out here. I hope you come back for this part 2 and get to enjoy this passion that Zack is sharing with us about Native American history. So if you'd like to reach out to Zack in between that time, I'm going to have his contacts in the show notes below. And if you'd like to reach out to me as well, my contacts will be below. But I'll just kind of tell them out to you real quick as well. If you'd like to reach out to me through email, it is cade, which is spelled CADE, at learningfromfriends.com. I do have a Facebook page, Learning from Friends Podcast, and then I do have a Patreon page. If you'd like to make a donation, that would be greatly appreciated in order to help support this cause. And so I do have a continued request of talk to people about the podcast. Share the knowledge you've gained. Share the joy that you get from this podcast itself. And as we leave here today, my name is Kay Curtis, your tour guide on this lovely adventure that I like to call Learning from Friends. And most of all, don't forget, let your curiosity fly high.